No one in that hallway had the slightest idea that the most dangerous man in Stonegate was sitting alone, fingers interlocked, gaze seemingly lost, while three walking mountains came toward him with the arrogant certainty of men who believed they had already won before even getting close. But what happened in that narrow stretch of concrete and silence changed everything forever. Stay with me until the end, because what this trio did or tried to do triggered one of the most intense moments in the prison's history. Even veterans from the North Block, men hardened by time and violence, froze where they stood. And before we go on, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This helps the video reach more people who love powerful stories full of twists. Now let's keep going, because what comes next is even heavier. Stonegate Maximum Security Penitentiary sat in the middle of a forgotten desert somewhere in the American interior, surrounded by miles of razor wire, watchtowers that never slept, and stories no one dared repeat out loud. It was the kind of place where reputations were carved by force, where every gesture, every glance, every breath decided who you would become inside those walls. And on that suffocating morning, everything began with a newcomer sitting on a cold metal bench, waiting for his turn to be swallowed by that concrete jungle. His name was Yun Park, at least that's what the official record said, and the calm in his posture didn't match anything around him. No tattoos, no scars, none of the desperate look typical of fresh arrivals. He looked out of place, and that was strange. Way too strange for a prison like Stonegate. His breathing was slow, measured, as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. His body stayed still, eyes fixed on a random spot on the wall, and his mind, though invisible, worked like a silent machine. To the other inmates, that calm looked like weakness. To anyone who didn't understand the language of trained men, it was natural to assume the new guy was terrified. But he wasn't. At the far end of the hallway, three bruisers appeared at the same time, walking with their shoulders wide, chests puffed out, tattooed arms swinging like weapons by themselves. Everyone knew them by three short, sharp names that told you everything you needed to know: Brackus, Kale, and Marek. They were the terror of East Block, the ones who made the rules, the silent judges of Stonegate. No one stood up to the three of them. No one survived them without paying a price. And that morning, the chosen price was the newcomer sitting alone. Brackus, the leader, walked like a man carrying the whole world on his shoulders. Every step echoed louder than it should, dragging the weight of the prison behind him. Kyle and Marek followed close behind, muscular shadows ready to crush anything in their path. Their faces were carved by years of violence, their eyes trained to detect fear. They lived off that fear, breathed it, needed it to be visible, tangible, almost shouted. But Yun Park wasn't giving them any of it, and that irritated Brackus deeply. As the trio closed in, inmates started appearing behind the bars, lining up like spectators waiting for a macabre show. The corridor filled with whispers, silent bets, and hungry stares. That was how things worked there. When Brackus moved, the prison stopped to watch. The hallway became an audience. Breaths hung suspended in the hot, heavy air. Brackus finally stopped, just a few steps from the newcomer, letting his presence fill the space. He lifted his chin, flaunting the thick, tattooed muscles of his neck, as if that alone should make the newcomer shrink. "Hey, rookie," he said, voice deep and dripping with contempt. "In here we got a rule. When I talk, you look." Yun didn't move, not even a fraction. Kyle let out a short, muffled laugh, like he was watching a private show. Marek stayed silent, eyes narrowed, trying to understand why that man wasn't reacting like everyone else. Brackus took another step. "I'm talking to you," he repeated, this time using a tone that usually made inmates tremble. Nothing. No trembling. No shift in breathing. No hint of submission or bravado. And then Yun finally lifted his eyes. Just one movement, Slow, smooth, and yet deep enough that even Brackus stalled for half a second. It wasn't a look of challenge, not hatred, not fear. It was the look of someone who had seen things none of those men could comprehend, empty and overflowing at the same time. A look that said, without words, that nothing happening there was new to him. A chill ran across Brackus's spine, but he'd never admit it. He stepped closer, angry at himself for hesitating. "Who do you think you are in here?" he growled. Yun blinked slowly, analyzing the situation with mathematical precision, and then he said, "Don't do this." That was all. 3 calm words, not a threat, not a plea, a fact. And it froze the entire corridor, because men who speak like that have either given up on life or are far too dangerous to be understood. Brackus didn't know which one Yun Park was, but he was about to find out, the worst way possible. And that moment would go down forever as the day the prison bully looked down on the new inmate, never realizing he was standing in front of a living legend of the Special Forces. Stonegate wasn't just a prison. It was a living organism, breathing, pulsing, watching, its long corridors stretching like veins that carried the memories, secrets, and sins of every man trapped inside. The sounds never changed, heavy footsteps echoing off concrete, the metallic clank of automated doors, the constant hum of fluorescent lights. But anyone who truly understood that place knew each noise carried something deeper, something darker about Stonegate's real nature. East Block, where the newcomer Yun Park had first been brought, was considered the heart of the prison, not in any poetic sense, but because everything started there. Conflicts, alliances, threats, and the rhythm of fear itself. Whoever controlled East Block controlled the entire facility, and that explained why Brackus, Kyle, and Marek guarded their territory with absolute dominance. Brackus was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. Built like a boulder, tattooed to the neck, he carried a primitive, instinctive intelligence beneath all that muscle. He grew up inside violence, learned to use his body long before he learned to speak, and found in Stonegate the perfect stage for the one thing he excelled at, domination. Kyle was the fastest of the trio, short on patience but terrifying in raw strength. Marek was the opposite, quiet, observant, the type who stored grudges like ammunition. Together, the three formed the inmate-led regime that dictated the unwritten laws of Stonegate. But Yun Park did not fit that environment. Not because of his uniform, it was the same as everyone else's, or because of his neutral posture. What truly set him apart was the silence. The way he moved, the way he positioned his body, the way he breathed. He didn't seem like a man terrified by a rival, scrambling internally to survive. He seemed like someone studying everything, mapping routes, assessing risks, identifying patterns, something no inmate did with such natural precision. The security cameras followed his movements, but to the guards watching the monitors, he was just another quiet inmate. None of them had the training to understand what was hidden behind that calm exterior. To them, Yun was simply another body keeping his head down. To the other prisoners, he was just the next target. But someone was watching differently. Old Man Henderson, a long-timer from the upper gallery and one of Stonegate's living archives, observed the scene from above. He was known for his flawless memory, for remembering stories everyone else had forgotten, including the ones about men who walked in silent and were carried out on stretchers. His tired eyes followed every step Brackus and his crew took, then locked onto the newcomer, and he noticed something no one else had. Yun didn't tremble. Not his hands, not his jaw, not his legs. No muscle showed tension, fear, or even the instinct to fight. It was as if he were waiting, either for something or for someone. Henderson recognized that look. He had seen it only twice before, and both times ended badly, but never for the man who carried that expression. Meanwhile, down in the center corridor, rumors started spreading through the cells. Inmates loved fresh stories, especially the ones promising conflict. And the arrival of the silent newcomer was quickly becoming the topic of the day. Some said he looked too weak to stand a chance against the trio. Others argued there was something too strange about him, a coldness that didn't sit right. Even the guards whispered among themselves. Officer Collins, new on the shift, muttered, "He doesn't look scared." "Every rookie looks calm until Brackus walks up," Miller, a veteran, replied. But Miller was wrong. Yun didn't look calm. He was calm. And that calm had a reason. What no one, neither guards nor inmates, knew was that Yun Park wasn't a common man. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't an easy target. He was something entirely different. A legend who walked with the silence of a predator, trained to disappear, to survive, and to take down men far more dangerous than Brackus. But for now, no one suspected. The trio believed they had full control. The whole prison thought they were watching another rookie on the verge of being crushed. Only one person knew the truth, Yun himself, and his mission inside Stonegate was only just beginning. The entire hallway held its breath when Brackus took that first, definitive step toward the newcomer. This was usually the moment when things turned into a show, the part where the prison bully reminded everyone of the natural order inside Stonegate. But that morning, something was about to break from the script. Kyle moved to the right, ready to block any attempt to escape. Marek positioned himself behind, prepared to grab the rookie if he panicked. The three of them were aligned, synchronized, seasoned veterans in the art of crushing resistance, physical, psychological, or moral. That was how they kept control. But when Brackus reached out to grab the collar of Yun Park's jumpsuit, his hand grabbed nothing. No inmate understood it. No guard could explain it later. Yun simply shifted his torso just enough for Brackus's heavy hand to slice through empty air. No sudden burst of speed, no aggressive counter, no noise, just precision. Brackus frowned, confused, convinced he had misjudged the distance. He didn't misjudge. His body was programmed by years of violence, dominance, and brute survival. Yun, however, looked like he had calculated the airflow itself, and he remained seated. Kyle stepped forward, irritated now. Marek tightened his fists, ready to engage. The hallway grew even quieter. Even the lights seemed to buzz with tension. And then Yun slowly lifted his head and looked at Brackus. That exchange of glances lasted less than 2 seconds, but it carried the weight of a sentence. Brackus felt his breath catch for a moment. He didn't understand what he had just seen. Not fear, not defiance, not submission. It was calculation. Cold, practiced calculation. The kind you find in men who have spent so much time with death that they've learned to treat it like part of their daily routine. But Brackus wasn't about to lose face. "You think that makes you special?" he growled, his voice echoing through the cells. "In here, everybody breaks. Everybody!" The rookie inhaled slowly, unhurried, as if choosing each movement with surgical precision. He shifted his weight, placed his hands on the bench, and stood up, slowly, but with a controlled exactness that felt rehearsed. He was smaller than Brackus, a lot smaller. But something in his posture made inmates instinctively pull back from their cell doors. "I don't want trouble," Yun said, his voice low and steady. "But you don't want this either." Kyle snorted, amused. Brackus let out a bitter laugh. "Don't want it?" He spread his arms wide, tattoos stretching over thick muscle. "I live for this." The hallway vibrated. Inmates pressed against their bars, murmuring, some excited, others uneasy. They expected punches, threats, humiliation, the usual show. But Yun stayed still, analyzing every stance, every angle, every possible route out, though he didn't look like he needed one. Marek was the first to move in, ready to shove Yun against the wall, but Yun simply stepped aside, calmly, almost casually, like dodging someone in a grocery store aisle, and Marek stumbled forward, briefly losing balance. Nothing humiliating, nothing dramatic, but enough to rattle the big man. The inmates reacted. Some burst into laughter. Others went dead silent. Brackus turned red. "Now you're gonna learn respect," he roared, charging in full force. But Yun stepped back only half a step that changed everything. He didn't hit Brackus, didn't block, didn't counter. He simply positioned himself so that the attack lost all its power. For the first time in years, Brackus felt his brute strength amount to nothing, and at the end of the hallway someone whispered, "That guy, he ain't normal." The conflict had begun. But no one there had any idea how big the coming storm would be. Stonegate rarely changed its rhythm. It was a precise, mechanical beast, repetitive, cold, engineered to crush any trace of individuality. But that day, something small had shifted, almost invisible. The silence didn't sound like the usual silence. The guards' footsteps carried a different weight, and inside the cells, whispers spread like sparks ready to ignite something far bigger. The tension sparked between Brackus and the newcomer had triggered an invisible alarm throughout the prison, and now other men were beginning to move in the shadows of what had happened. Up on the gallery walkway, Henderson, the old man with deep eyes and an unbreakable memory, watched everything with the intensity of someone seeing an ancient pattern return to life. He knew Stonegate better than any guard ever would. He could tell a coward from a brave man, a predator from a manipulator, a leader from a broken soul, a dangerous man from a reckless one, and Yun Park didn't fit in any normal category. "That kid isn't a kid," Henderson muttered to himself, tracking the newcomer's behavior with almost scientific precision. He'd seen men like that before, men who were trained, disciplined, shaped by something far greater than street violence. And every time he'd seen that particular kind of stare, cold, deep, calculated, the story never ended well for the ones who tried to control them. While Henderson connected old memories to this new disturbance, another man was paying attention to details no one else noticed: Owen Briggs, the quietest inmate in the observation wing. Unlike the others, he had no interest in fights. He watched for strategy. He was known for his outside contacts, for his ability to trade information. To him, Stonegate wasn't a prison, it was a board game, and Yun had just appeared as a new piece, potentially valuable. Brackus felt it too, but in a different way. His authority had been publicly questioned, and inside a place like Stonegate, that was a death blow. He knew he couldn't let the incident with the rookie spread as a sign of weakness. He needed to act. Kyle, impulsive as ever, suggested attacking Yun during lunch, where the cameras had blind spots. Marek, colder, suggested something even more violent. But Brackus didn't want to simply win. He wanted to re-establish dominance, crush any shadow of defiance. Meanwhile, Yun Park moved through the prison as if he were invisible. Same calm pace, same neutral posture, same distant analytical gaze. But anyone watching closely could see he was counting doors, measuring distances, comparing patrol patterns. Every step he took seemed to contribute to a massive mental blueprint, an internal map of routes and possibilities. The guards didn't notice. The inmates didn't understand. But Henderson caught every detail. "He's studying the terrain," Henderson whispered, "like a soldier." The most dangerous subplot, however, wasn't happening in the cell blocks, but in the monitoring room. Officer Wallace, on duty that morning, noticed that Yun Park's file was far too empty. No detailed history. No clear origin, no standard information, just a generic name and details that felt manufactured. Wallace turned to Miller, the most experienced guard in the sector. "This doesn't look right." "What is right in Stonegate?" Miller replied, eyes glued to the monitor. "Everyone here has a past." "Yeah, but not this clean," Wallace insisted. He tried accessing the sealed file attached to Yun's name, but an error message popped up. Access denied. Clearance level insufficient. That never happened with ordinary inmates. Then Wallace saw something even more disturbing. The cameras had captured Yun dodging Brackus and his crew with movements so smooth they looked choreographed. Not street defense, not prison reflexes. Technique, discipline, training. "Miller," Wallace said, his tone suddenly serious. "This guy isn't a regular inmate." Miller frowned, leaning in toward the feed. "If he's not a regular inmate, then why the hell is he here?" No one had an answer. But a small group was beginning to realize the truth. The clash between the prison bully and the silent rookie was far from a simple ego battle or turf dispute. What was coming was tied to something much bigger, something Stonegate wasn't prepared to face, and without even knowing it, Yun Park had already become the epicenter of a web of tension involving inmates, guards, and forces far beyond the prison walls. A storm was gathering, and whatever happened next would be the moment everything changed. The tension inside Stonegate had reached a level only a handful of places on Earth could handle. It wasn't just silence. It was the kind that cuts through space, that messes with your breathing, that makes even the most confident predators rethink their next move. And standing in the center of that silence was Yun Park, holding his lunch tray like he was just another inmate going through his daily routine. But he wasn't invisible anymore. After what happened in the hallway, the entire prison wanted to see him break. Eyes followed him like blades. Guards watched every gesture. Inmates studied every detail. Not because they wanted to learn, but because they wanted to survive whatever was coming. And what was coming had a name: Brackus. The massive prison bully shoved open the metal doors of the cafeteria with such force that the hinges screeched, making dozens of inmates straighten in their seats. Kyle and Marek followed right behind him, wearing the expressions of men who believed the victory was already theirs. Brackus didn't just want to beat Yun, he wanted to humiliate him. He wanted his reputation back. He wanted Stonegate to remember exactly who ran the place, and today he was willing to do whatever it took. From the upper tier, Henderson watched the trio approach. His hardened heart skipped for the first time in years. He leaned over the railing, narrowing his eyes. "It's starting." On the far side, Owen Briggs slipped a small notebook into his pocket. He never took action without reason. He dealt in information, and right now he was about to witness something worth more than gold. The cafeteria suddenly felt too small. Brackus stopped behind Yun without saying a word, just breathing heavily. Yun stood there like none of it concerned him. Kyle moved in on one side, Marek on the other. A perfect ambush, 3 against 1, every angle calculated. Brackus grabbed the rookie's shoulder, squeezing hard. "Now you're gonna look at me," he said, wearing a smile that didn't belong anywhere except cruelty. Yun said nothing, and that enraged Brackus more than any insult possibly could. "Who the hell do you think you are, huh?" Brackus tightened his grip. "Think you can embarrass me in front of the whole damn prison?" Silence. It was as if Yun wasn't even listening. But then something shifted, something tiny, precise, almost invisible. Yun glanced at the reflection in the stainless steel counter, studying angles, distances, stances, building an invisible diagram inside his head. And when Brackus tried to yank him around, Yun moved. Not fast, not violently, just perfectly. A tiny twist of the arm, a short step backward, a barely noticeable rotation of the hips. Brackus's massive body simply gave in. He fell forward as if someone had pulled the ground from under him. His tray hit the floor with a sharp metallic crack. Kyle and Marek lunged at the same time, but Yun flowed around them with effortless precision, using their own momentum instead of force. One crash after another. Kyle slid across a table. Marek stumbled over his own weight. The whole thing took less than 3 seconds, and when the mental dust settled, Yun stood calmly, body aligned, breathing steady, showing no sign of exertion. Brackus rose from the floor with the expression of someone who had no idea what had just happened. Henderson whispered, "Dear God." "What?" an inmate beside him asked. "Those movements, that's not street fighting, that's tactical, military." Brackus roared and charged at the newcomer like a raging bull. Yun stepped back one single step, just one, and that was enough. Brackus stormed past with full force, but Yun caught him by a specific point on the arm, a pressure spot only highly trained men know, and pulled him toward the ground with a movement so clean it looked choreographed. The thud Brackus made when he hit the floor silenced Stonegate completely, absolute silence. And then Owen Briggs murmured what no one else could put into words. "That man, he's no civilian." Henderson added, "He's special forces." In the monitoring room, a guard's eyes widened as he finally managed to access the hidden file attached to Yun Park's name. A coded designation appeared, a designation used by only one kind of soldier. Back in the cafeteria, Yun finally lifted his eyes and said loud enough for Brackus and everyone else to hear, "I warned you. He wasn't a rookie. He wasn't weak. He wasn't prey. He was a legend. A shadow trained to take down monsters far worse than anything inside Stonegate. And Brackus had just learned that, the hardest way possible." The cafeteria floor was still vibrating from Brackus's impact when silence fell over Stonegate like a heavy curtain. It felt as if time itself had stopped. No one breathed. No one blinked. Even the guards, men who witnessed violence every single day, stood frozen at what they had just seen. Yun Park hadn't just beaten the prison's top bully. He had dismantled him, with technique, with precision, with a supernatural calm. Brackus, the unbeatable, the unbreakable, the absolute ruler of Stonegate, was now on his knees, hands pressed to the ground, as he struggled to catch both his breath and his pride. Kyle and Marek stared at the newcomer with eyes full of something neither of them had ever felt before. Fear, not respect, not caution, pure fear. The kind that cuts through instinct and leaves only one truth. You can't fight this. Up in the upper tiers, inmates from every block pressed their faces against the bars, trying to catch every detail. Henderson was the first to break the silence. He took down Brackus. Without strength, he whispered, like he was watching a ghost. A murmur swept through the cells, spreading like an icy wind crawling across the prison. The rookie's special forces. He's military. He's elite. No, that's a level we've never even seen. That last sentence, spoken by one of the oldest prisoners, spread like wildfire. Owen Briggs, always observing like a chess player discovering a new, dangerous piece on the board, leaned back against the wall and crossed his arms. In that moment, he realized Yun wasn't just dangerous. He was valuable. On the cafeteria floor, Officer Miller finally snapped out of shock and grabbed his radio. "Attention units, lock down the cafeteria. Repeat, lock it down now." But Wallace grabbed his wrist before he could transmit. "Wait. What are you doing?" Miller whispered, stunned. "If you intervene now, you'll turn this into a riot. Look around." Miller looked. The inmates weren't ready to attack. They weren't restless. They weren't waiting for an opportunity. They were watching Yun. Watching him the way you watch something that might determine everyone's fate. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Brackus finally stood up, still trembling, his face marked not by injury, but by humiliation. Humiliation that cut deeper than any wound. He didn't look at Yun. He couldn't. He simply turned and walked out of the cafeteria, with Kyle and Marek following behind him like shattered shadows. The trio that once walked with arrogance was now stumbling away like children heading home after a beating. Yun remained still, holding his tray as if he were just waiting his turn to eat. And that was more devastating than any punch. The indifference, the absolute serenity, the invisible dominance. A prisoner shouted, "Hey, did you see that?" That wasn't a fight. That was a lesson. That was an execution. Those lines echoed, intertwined, spread, and instantly began shaping Yun Park's new reputation. The prison, which had once seen him as prey, now saw him as something entirely different, something no one had a word for. A legend was being born. In the monitoring room, Wallace finally managed to access part of Yun Park's restricted file, a file no Stonegate officer should have been able to open, and what he saw made his blood turn cold. Yun's name was linked to a military unit that wasn't supposed to exist. No photos, no public records, no personal data, just a title, Shadow Operator, Omega Level. Classification, Extreme Secrecy. Authorization, above presidential clearance. Wallace pulled his hands away from the keyboard like he had touched fire. "Miller, what is that?" the veteran asked, leaning closer. Wallace shook his head slowly. "Whoever this man is, he shouldn't be here." Meanwhile, Brackus reached the central wing, gasping, sweating as if he'd run miles. He kicked a crate, punched a wall, knocked over anything within reach. The humiliation ran through his veins like poison. "He made a fool out of me," he growled. "I'm gonna end him." But Marek, for the first time in his life, dared to disagree. "No, you're not," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Brackus spun around. "What did you say?" Marek swallowed hard. "If you go after that man again, you die." The silence that followed shattered the bully's very core. Back in the cafeteria, Yun Park finally sat down, ate in silence, breathed in silence, stood up in silence. But inside Stonegate, chaos was brewing, and everyone knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Stonegate breathed differently after the cafeteria incident. It was as if the corridors, the cells, the guards, even the walls themselves had realized something had shifted on the invisible chessboard of that prison. Yun Park walked through the blocks with no hurry, wearing the same calm expression as before, but the air around him had changed. There was now a kind of respectful distance no inmate dared to cross. He hadn't asked for it, he didn't want it, but he carried an invisible mark now, the man who took down Brackus without breaking a sweat, and in Stonegate that meant everything. Yun, however, didn't seem to care about fame. He kept observing, calculating, memorizing schedules, routes, and patterns. But for the first time since his arrival, he began revealing a small part of who he was, not through words, but through quiet, deliberate actions. The morning after the incident, while inmates waited in line for breakfast, a group of 3 men cornered a teenage newcomer, a skinny kid named Tyler, who barely had the strength to carry his own tray. One of the bullies shoved him against the wall. The second blocked his way. The third whispered something that made Tyler shake. Before any guard noticed, Yun appeared behind them. He didn't speak. He didn't threaten. He didn't lift a hand. He just stood there, watching, and that was enough. The 3 men backed away, one by one, as if a predator had stepped out of the shadows. Tyler looked up, confused, unable to understand why a man like Yun would care. "Thanks," he whispered, voice trembling. Yun simply nodded and walked away. That small, silent gesture spread through Stonegate faster than contraband rumors. Everyone already knew Yun was powerful. They'd seen that firsthand. What unsettled the prison now was the idea that he could choose a side, and if he chose one, the balance of power would collapse. From the upper tier, Henderson watched and smiled for the first time in years. "He's starting to show who he really is," he murmured. But the one who truly understood the significance of that moment was Owen Briggs. With his notebook always close, he began assembling a mental puzzle. Yun wasn't just lethal, he was disciplined, controlled, selective. He didn't strike without reason, he didn't react to provocation, and when he acted, it was always calculated. That made him dangerous, but also valuable. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Brackus was being treated for the shoulder sprain caused by Yun's flawless takedown. He tried to hide the pain, but he couldn't hide the emotional fracture. His reputation had snapped in half, and there were no bandages for that. Kyle and Marek avoided the topic, but they knew something inside their leader was breaking. And when a man like Brackus starts breaking on the inside, violence tends to spill outward. Captain Ramsey, the head guard, had also begun monitoring Yun more closely. Not out of fear, but out of strategic caution. "If that man ever decides to cause trouble, we won't be able to stop him," he told Wallace. "He doesn't seem to want trouble," Wallace replied. Ramsay exhaled slowly. "And that's exactly what scares me. Men who don't want to fight, but can win every fight, are unpredictable." In the yard, other inmates started approaching Yun carefully, offering cigarettes, food, favors. He rejected all of them. He didn't want alliances, he didn't want debts. And that made him even more mysterious. Tyler, the kid he'd helped, tried to thank him again later that day, but Yun simply said, "Stay alert. In here, the wrong look is more dangerous than the wrong punch." It was the first time he gave anyone advice, and in that small gesture, he showed he wasn't just a walking weapon. He was a man who still carried a piece of humanity. Yun's overcoming wasn't physical, it was internal. He wasn't trying to survive the prison, he was trying to survive himself. But Stonegate was shifting around him, and big shifts always bring bigger consequences. The storm was far from over. Yun Park's silent victory over Brackus didn't just disrupt Stonegate's routine. It completely rewrote the invisible hierarchy that ruled every inch of that prison. Men began moving differently, speaking differently, watching differently. Even the guards, hardened by daily brutality, started walking with more caution around the newcomer. But none of that meant Yun was safe. When an entire system is shaken, it tries to correct itself, and Stonegate's correction would be violent. In the medical wing, Brackus wasn't just recovering from his physical injuries, he was trying to piece together a shattered ego. He had always been the predator of that place, and now, for the first time, he found himself in the position of prey. The rumors echoing through the corridors, Brackus fell, the new guy's special forces. That man doesn't feel fear, ate at him like acid. Marek, the sharpest of the trio, quickly understood the gravity of the situation. "You can't fight him again," he said as Brackus stared at the floor. "I will," the giant replied, jaw locked. "Not this time, not alone." Kyle, impulsive as always, nodded. "We need more men, a plan, something he can't predict." Brackus looked at them with a dark fire in his eyes. "I don't want help, I want revenge." But Stonegate wouldn't allow that desire to resolve itself so easily. Meanwhile, Yun walked across the yard the same way he always did, quiet, analyzing every inch around him. He watched the guard towers, the shift rotations, the escape routes, the camera blind spots. Not because he planned to escape, but because his mind was conditioned to map threats, even when nothing was happening. Tyler, the kid he had helped, approached him for the second time that day. "They're saying Brackus is going to try again," he whispered, "and he's not coming alone." "That's his problem," Yun said. "No, sir, that's your problem." Yun stopped walking. The kid was right. Before he could respond, Henderson appeared above them, leaning against the railing of the upper gallery. "Listen, Park," the old man said bluntly. "You might be whatever you were out there, but in here, things work differently. Violence breeds violence," Yun replied. "That's not all," Henderson shot back. "In here, nobody falls alone. If Brackus goes down for good, someone else will try to take his place, and that turns this whole place into chaos. You opened a door you might not be able to close." Yun looked at the veteran, but didn't answer. The old man continued, "You're not fighting a man, you're fighting a system." Those words lingered in the air, hanging over Yun like a warning that his very presence had triggered consequences he couldn't control. Meanwhile, Owen Briggs, always observant, had begun quietly investigating the newcomer's past, not out of curiosity, but out of strategy. He wanted to understand the value of such a rare piece on Stonegate's board, and the more he discovered, or failed to discover, the more uneasy he became. "This guy's got no prison record," he whispered to one of his contacts. "No standard military file, no financial logs. It's like he's a ghost, a highly trained ghost." By late afternoon, the atmosphere in Stonegate had turned heavier. Glances grew longer, conversations shorter, footsteps faster. Something was about to happen. You could feel it in the air, like the pressure before a storm. Guards began reinforcing patrols after noticing unusual movement among Brachus's followers. Equipment was checked, orders were repeated. But deep down, every officer knew that if an open confrontation broke out involving Yun Park, it couldn't be contained. When night fell, Stonegate sank into a silence, unlike its usual stillness. Not the silence of exhaustion, the silence of anticipation. Brachus and his men gathered in East Block, planning something big. Yun sat in his cell, breathing deeply, aware that the fragile peace he'd maintained was beginning to crumble, and Henderson watched it all with the feeling that he was about to witness something that would change Stonegate forever. The board was set, the pieces were moving, the climax was approaching, and there was no turning back. That night, Stonegate seemed to breathe differently, slower, heavier, as if every wall knew something inevitable was about to unfold. The corridors were too quiet. The guards spoke in short, tense phrases. The inmates moved like invisible spectators to a tragedy they all sensed coming. It felt as if the entire prison had gathered in a single silent expectation of the moment when its fragile balance would finally collapse. Brachus wasn't hiding. Men who scheme in the dark fear the light. Men who scheme in the light and want an audience, and the bully of Stonegate wanted every bar, every whisper, every pair of eyes witnessing his revenge. In the north corridor, the narrowest, the most dangerous, the farthest from the cameras, he waited. Behind him, Kale and Marek breathed deeply, trembling not from fear, but from something worse. The realization that they were about to face something they could not control. Brachus, however, felt only rage. This wasn't about power. This was wounded pride. "It ends tonight, Park," he muttered, voice low and venomous. "Tonight you learn who runs this place." Across the prison, Yun walked alone. The guard on duty had opened the inner yard for the final round, but Yun veered away from the route as if he already knew exactly where he needed to be. The intuition of a man trained to read environments spoke louder than any map or instruction. When he turned into the north corridor, he saw the silhouettes. 3 men, rigid stances, eyes locked, and Brachus in the center, breathing like a bull ready to charge. The world seemed to shrink in that instant. Inmates in nearby cells noticed the movement and rushed to the bars, forming a living corridor of watchful eyes, aware that what they were about to witness would be etched into Stonegate's history. Yun simply stopped. No tremor, no fear, no hesitation. "You came alone," Brachus growled, taking 2 heavy steps forward. "Or did you think you could run?" Yun replied with silence, but his eyes analyzed everything. The placement of Brachus's feet, the tension in Kale's shoulders, the slight imbalance in Marek's stance, the echo of the narrow hall, the camera blind spot above. Every detail recorded, processed, ordered. "You don't need to do this," he finally said, voice calm. Kyle swallowed hard. Marek looked away. Brachus laughed. "I don't need to?" He spread his arms, chest open wide, like he was facing down an invisible enemy. "You humiliated me in front of everyone, and you think I'm letting that slide?" "The humiliation didn't come from me," Yun answered. "It came from the man you chose to be." It was like a blade slicing through the air. Brachus charged first. The sound wasn't that of an attack. It was a building collapsing. The giant hurled his full weight at Yun, a strike that would have crushed any ordinary man. But Yun wasn't ordinary. He sidestepped half a step, lifted an arm, and used Brachus's own momentum against him. The giant slammed into the wall, cracking the concrete. A low murmur rippled through the cells. Brachus roared, spun, and attacked again, but Yun anticipated the movement before it even finished forming. He calculated the shoulder angle, the foot timing, the opening in the torso, a touch to the wrist, a subtle hip rotation, and Brachus dropped to his knees, bewildered. Cale and Marek hesitated. A fraction of a second, just one. But in a real fight, a fraction is everything. "Don't just stand there," Brackus roared, spitting blood. "Now!" Both men lunged. Yun exhaled. The first strike came high, the second came diagonal, the third aimed at his flank. But Yun moved like someone who'd faced multiple attackers in alleys, villages, war zones. Every dodge seemed like simple math. Every block, an anticipated solution. Kyle fell first, a precise strike collapsing him at the base of the stomach. His body folded before he could scream. Marek tried to hit Yun from behind but received only a counter that shut down all his strength. Then only Brackus remained. The bully staggered to his feet. The hatred in his eyes had vanished, replaced by fear. Who are you?" he rasped. Yun took 2 slow steps forward. He didn't raise a hand, didn't take a stance, didn't threaten. He simply answered, "The wrong person for you to provoke." Brackus charged one last time, screaming like a desperate animal. Yun moved only once, a precise pivot. A touch to the shoulder, another to the knee, and the giant collapsed as if his own body had abandoned him. Absolute silence. Then a whispered voice from one of the cells. "He doesn't fight. He calculates." And in that moment, all of Stonegate understood. The bully hadn't just fallen. He had been defeated by someone who did not belong there. The legend had just begun. The North Corridor remained silent long after Brackus fell. It wasn't ordinary silence. It was the kind of silence born when everyone realizes they've just witnessed something that shouldn't be possible. Every inmate behind the bars watched Yun as if they were staring at a creature that didn't follow the logic of this place. A normal man didn't move like that. A normal man didn't anticipate every strike. A normal man didn't take down 3 monsters with the calm of someone merely adjusting his balance. But Yun simply steadied his breathing and looked down at the floor as if nothing had happened. He didn't celebrate, didn't posture, didn't expect applause. He was someone who understood the weight of battles and who saw no victory in any of them. When he turned to walk away, the sound of dozens of inmates holding their breath echoed like a single collective gasp. A legend was being born. Brackus, still on his knees, stared into nothing. The physical defeat was visible, but the internal collapse was worse. He couldn't understand what had happened, and that was more painful than any injury. A bully needs to believe he's invincible. When that lie breaks, everything collapses with it, and Brackus collapsed alone, leaning against the wall as if the concrete could hold him together. Kyle and Marek stayed frozen, unable to speak. They had followed Brackus for years, convinced their leader was the highest point of strength in Stonegate. But today they had seen something different, a man who didn't need to shout, intimidate, or impose fear. A man who controlled the world around him as if danger were nothing more than exact mathematics. The guards arrived minutes later, conveniently late. No one wanted to interfere with whatever had just happened. They found Brackus on the ground, his goons sprawled out, and Yun standing at the far end of the corridor, completely untouched. The shift captain glanced at the other officers and murmured, "If anyone says they saw this, no one's going to believe them." But it was far too late. The rumor was already spreading. In Block C, inmates repeated, "He dropped Brackus without even hitting him." In Block E, others spoke about Yun's eyes that seemed to see before it happened. In the cafeteria later that day, no one approached his table, not out of fear of what he'd do, but out of a natural, almost instinctive respect. And Yun remained exactly the same, sitting alone, eating in silence, observing everything without drawing attention. The incident in the North Corridor hadn't changed him, but it had changed everything around him. When the warden heard the reports, he demanded access to the cameras and discovered that the only footage of the incident was mysteriously corrupted. The kind of failure that doesn't happen by accident. And that's when the administration realized something. Yun Park wasn't a common inmate. He wasn't someone the system could control. And above all, he wasn't someone they should provoke again. But no one imagined the most important part. What they had witnessed wasn't even the beginning. Stonegate had awakened something much bigger, and Yun Park's true story was only beginning to open its first door. That night, as Stonegate finally drifted into sleep, Yun Park sat awake in his cell, alone in the darkness, breathing slowly, as if waiting for a signal that had not yet arrived. Outside, the corridors carried whispered echoes. The new guy isn't normal. He saw everything before it happened. Who is that man? But Yun didn't care about rumors. He thought only of the shadows that had no names yet, the real reasons he had come here, because defeating Brachus was not his mission. It was only the warning, the beginning, the step before what was truly coming. If this story kept you hooked until now, then you already know. Stonegate still holds countless secrets, and Yun Park is just getting started. Before you go, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps the channel reach even more people. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories filled with tension, twists, and unforgettable characters. Drop a comment telling me what surprised you the most. I read every single one. And if you want to keep diving into this world, choose one of the videos now appearing on your screen. I'll see you in the next story.